to Leaders in the Arena. Again, as I said, my name is Jeana Whitener, CEO here at Bridge Innovate, and we are a global network of business strategists and consultants that team up with you to spark distinctive strategies and innovations to transform your organization for growth and good. This podcast is designed to share valuable insights and lessons from our clients and network to support your innovation journey. Today, I'm really excited to host a friend, my good friend, and my client, Jeana Lee, Chief of Staff for the Chief Financial Officer at Unum. Jeana focuses on leading key operational activities, communication strategy, and ensuring Unum has a dynamic culture where leaders can thrive, as well as helping develop and drive Unum's finances long-term strategy and transformation. So Jeana, thanks for being here, and maybe tell the audience a little bit more about yourself.
Thanks, Jenny. I love that you called me a friend because I feel that way. We've known each other for quite some time. So my name's Jeana Lee. I'm a native of Chattanooga, Tennessee, born and raised here locally. Married. I've got two little kids. So my husband's name is Zach, and my children, Aiden and Sophia. Sophia's 4, Aiden is 7. And so, we are really ingrained in the Chattanooga community, both through family and friends, but also through philanthropy and giving back. And that's been a big point in my life. And so that's kind of on a personal level. Professionally, I kind of joke with my Unum colleagues that I've been with the company for a decade, but I had kind of this 2-year hiatus because I did leave for a couple of years, and gosh, that was a great experience. So I left Unum for a couple of years and went to a local nonprofit here in town, and led the marketing, communications, and corporate engagement efforts. But really, when I take a step back on my career, and I'm the chief of staff or CFO today, but my career really has been centered around how do we tell a story? How do we think about moving our strategy forward in a way that really brings people along and is engaging? And how do we focus on creating a culture where, and you read it in my bio, but where people can thrive, our employees can thrive, and innovation can thrive. And so lots of planning in the midst of all of that too. But yeah, it's great to be here today.
Good. And when you were just talking a little bit about your history and your career, everything that you're talking about is really igniting change.
Yeah.
When you think about your early career with Unum and then going into the social sector, even when you were talking about your family and giving back, I can see that change and leading change and making the world a better place is just part of who you are. So I'm really excited to be here with you today. We've had an opportunity to team up with Unum, as you know, for over 10 years and a number of different projects. But today, I was hoping that we could get into a little bit of the detail on the project that you're leading for the finance area around transformation and change, and maybe share with the audience some key insights and maybe some lessons learned that they might be able to take away and share with their own organization to drive greater change. So talk to us a little bit about the project that you're leading.
Yeah. So Jenny, let's go back to the beginning. And so we're in your studio today over here at Bridge Innovate. And the last time I was here was when we kicked off this work with our finance team. And so our strategy and transformation effort at Unum and in finance, we gave it a name, but we gave it a name so that we could really have our employees rally behind something, and that we had a multi-year strategy. But it's Finance 2025 began in your studios last year in the springtime. So it's been a little over a year. And when I think about how that started, when I joined, Steve Zabel's our CFO, and that's who I support. When I joined his team as chief of staff, I sat down with him and I was like, hey, what do you want my role to really look like? A chief of staff can do a lot of different things. And I said, what are your priorities? And, Steve had just, when he was appointed CFO, it was July of 2019, and was, when you think about the timeline there, that was right before COVID hit, right? And so getting acclimated to being a new CFO for Unum, which we're a Fortune 250, large company. And then in March of 2020, the world shuts down and we've got COVID, and now we're in crisis, right? And so Steve and his leadership team were really focused on leading the company through that crisis and maintaining our financial strength so that we can deliver, our promise ultimately, not only to our shareholders, but our customers. And so when I came on board, it was, 2021, the end of 2021. And so when Steve and I were having this conversation, he said, it's time that my team really has a strategy that we can all rally behind. And finance at Unum has really evolved beyond the traditional finance employee. We've got a lot of different roles in our finance organization that you wouldn't consider traditional finance. And he said, I want everybody to understand their place as a part of finance, but their place as a part of Unum, so that they could be, each individual person should be able to connect what they do on a daily basis back to enterprise strategy and ultimately our goals and our purpose. And so really from there, Finance 2025 was born. And as I was navigating conversations internally about, okay, how do we think about standing up this strategy and what does this look like? I knew I needed to call you, Jenny.
I'm thankful that you did.
I knew we needed structure,
Right.
and I knew we needed a thoughtful design on how we were going to think about approaching our strategy and developing a multi-year plan and bringing other people along. And so that was kind of the beginning of it. And it all started here at your studio. We brought Steve's, we worked with you to bring kind of this process to life. But really, even when we started, we were working on just kind of a strategy for Steve's senior team to oversee. It wasn't, what it kind of morphed into. I think it was, we brought his team offsite to this location in the spring of last year. And I think from those conversations, it was very clear at the end of that session that this had turned into something bigger than just, a traditional strategy approach. This really was transformation and was going to be big for finance and for Unum.
Right. Well, one of the things I think is important to highlight that you just shared is in the very beginning of thinking about launching a strategy, when you and Steve sat down. And as the CFO, he said, I want everyone to be able to contribute. I want everyone to feel a part of this strategy as it evolves and as we implement it. And I think that vision of this collaborative approach where all the leaders can engage in architecting and designing and transforming the future of finance really set the foundation for a great strategic launch. And so, what I would just kind of highlight with contrary to that, right, it's when an organization sends a group of people off to an offsite location and they come back with a strategy. I think you started with the leadership team, just as you said, you got them offsite. They set the pillars for what would be the major focus areas, and then opened that up. Talk about with the audience about how you engaged more broadly, how you brought this vision to life around bringing more voices in to the design of the strategy and into it's now the transformation process you're in.
So before we go there's something I want to highlight.
Okay.
And I promise I'll get to that point. But I think foundationally, when you're looking at hey, we're going to have a collaborative strategic design and we're going to bring people along in the transformation process. At its core, for that foundation to kind of thrive, to really have a strong environment where that type of collaboration can again thrive, you've got to set the stage for that at the enterprise level, whether you're at a big company like Unum, you're at a local nonprofit, at a school, whatever it is. And so while yes, I accredit Steve and his senior leadership team for saying like, hey, this needs to be an inclusive process. It can't just be us making and driving decisions. I also credit Unum for what the work that had been happening behind the scenes to really make sure that could launch well. And here's what I mean by that. And I took some notes. I wouldn't forget these because I thought it was so important. It starts with your people. Like, have you hired the right people? Like, have you sourced the right talent and brought in really strong, smart, intelligent people creative people who can drive innovation at your company? Unum had done that. Check.
Right.
The other thing is, are you inclusive? So you've brought in all these smart, really, sharp people, but have you created an inclusive environment where when someone comes to the table with ideas, they feel comfortable sharing those, and our inclusion and diversity journey at Unum has included a lot of training, a lot of dialogue and conversation and reinforcing it. And so we brought really smart people in. We gave them the environment where they could feel like their voices weren't only heard, but that their opinions mattered. And you've also got to have a culture where you're allowing people to fail fast. Right. And so I think that the first 2 points I made, bringing in smart people, having an inclusive culture, we had those. I think we aspired to have this fail fast culture. And what I think we learned along the way with Finance 2025 over the past year is that we aspire to have that, and it's something we're consistently nurturing,
Right.
because you've got to give people the roadway to say, and the freedom to say, it's okay to fail. We're not going to get this perfect, but it's kind of this iterative process that we're designing where we're checking in along the way to say, all right, how'd that go? And being comfortable with those reflections. Right. And so setting the foundation before making sure you've got the right foundation to launch something like this so that you can be more inclusive, right, with bringing more people to the table to co-design it with you is really, really critical.
I think that's so important that you brought up the aspect of having the right talent, being inclusive, and this opportunity to be iterative.
Yeah.
Because I felt like that we engaged through this process together for Unum Finance. When you started to bring in more people in the design of the strategy, many of them have not done that before.
Yeah.
Or for many of them, for the first time, we're looking at disruptive trends in the marketplace, or looking at in more depth internal customer requests or challenges that they were experiencing. And their first idea, their first, development of strategy, of a strategic position, may need more work. And so you really lived that. You invited people to be engaged. You got them an opportunity through the process where we teamed up, giving them opportunity to create, suggested strategy initiatives, and then to get feedback and to iterate that. So I think oftentimes when people hear this fail fast, fail early, they're like, how do we do that?
Yeah, it's uncomfortable.
How do we do that? Especially if you have a group of finance individuals that are all about accuracy, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, it's like within their culture to say, yeah, sure, let's fail fast. Yeah. But I think we laid out for them this sprint methodology that said, in the first 2 weeks, we want to come up with a point of view. Yeah. And then we want to get feedback on that point of view. Then we're going to iterate that. And so the process that we built out for them embraced this sort of aspect of iterative design. And I think they got comfortable with it.
Yeah, they did, but it took some time,
right.
So when we're talking about including more people, so our CFO, his direct reports are all senior vice presidents at Unum. And so when we said we're going to include broader finance leadership into the design, that meant primarily at the vice president, some AVPs really engaged in designing this last year. And when we invited them to the table, and you had a process, great process, to kind of run us through, there was definitely people were uncomfortable with that because they hadn't been asked to do this at this level and at this scope before. So doing things like when we were here last year and everybody had to present, we had designed this process where we were doing all this research. We were basically benchmarking, what's happening internally, what's happening externally. Let's make sure we're bringing that perspective into this process and then designing from there. And so we had our CFO, his senior team all here on site, but had asked our vice president group to dial in virtually to basically present on their research. And I think there was definitely some nerves there from the group. And these are really sharp leaders. And they were like, well, okay, well, what is it they want to see? I want to make sure I get this right. Going back to your point around accuracy and kind of the finance professional or persona. I want to get everything right. And it wasn't about getting everything right, but that was a skill that we had to nurture and develop along the way. And I'll tell you where we are today with our leadership team, our broader finance leadership team, is I think they're really doing an excellent job with this and have embraced this kind of like fail fast culture, and are now really pushing that down into the organization, which has been a great byproduct of all of this.
Right. I mean, you know, one of the things, just hearing you talk about it, that when you engage in a collaborative strategy design process, which was part of the original vision that you and Steve had, that it not only gets buy-in along the way, but it builds leadership capability.
Yeah.
All the VP levels that were doing that benchmarking, they're researching, they're looking for the leading trends and disruptions to expect in the marketplace that might impact the finance capability for Unum. You've just elevated their knowledge base. You've given them an opportunity to sort of exercise critical thinking and problem solving, and now they're architecting that new pathway to be ready for those changes, right? And so when you think about leading and nurturing company-wide change, it's really that what you did in engaging the leaders, giving them an opportunity to look out beyond their organization, as well as deeply in the organization for that data, for that inspiration, that I think was the basis for them to imagine the future, to imagine what could be, and then what would be the strategy to get us there. I really felt like it was a great pathway.
Yeah. Setting the vision has been critical since the get-go with Finance 2025. And so I think equipping our leaders, not just Steve and his leadership team, but our broader finance leadership team, equipping them with tools and research and to not only move the work forward, but to set the tone with their teams to really say, hey, here's our why, here's the vision, here's where we aspire to go. I think it's definitely rallied the troops a bit more than had we not had that same level of engagement and process. And starting with the why, I'm a huge fan of Simon Sinek's Start with the Why book. If you've not read it, I tell everybody you've got to read it. And all of that's really critical. But Simon Sinek, one of his quotes, he said, passion alone can't cut it. For passion to survive, it needs structure. And that couldn't be more true. And so when I think about like the success of our strategy and transformation effort and how quickly we stood it up, that structure couldn't have happened without Bridge Innovate, without you all coming alongside of us to really bring that to life. Because otherwise, unless you've got a full dedicated team that's like yours, internal to your company, you're going to do all of this off the side of your desk and you're not going to prioritize it, or maybe it'll ebb and flow and how it gets prioritized. But if you want to launch something and really get people behind it and build energy and momentum, you need help to develop a meaningful structure that's well thought out and designed with intention.
Right. So a couple of things I'm hearing you say. One was being intentional. The time that we spent to really architect a vision was important. Getting people engaged in that process and then engaged and then saying, what should be the strategy to deliver on that vision? And then I think the next thing you're saying is resource the effort.
Yes.
Make sure it's something that you're not doing on the back of a napkin in the last 10 minutes of the day. The vision and the strategy really are the pillars for that next generation of your company. And it needs effective resources, whether, hopefully it's Bridge or it's, like you said, an internal team or something that helps you get from here to that next place, that next generation of capability. Talk about some of the things that you have learned now that the strategy has been defined and you're getting, into the full-fledged parts of transformation. Any other tips or guidance that you would share with the teams about taking that next step from strategy design to transformation?
Yeah, before we go there, one of the things I want to hit on before we get to that point, when we, so when we started this process, really started working with your team design, and we started in the spring of last year, and really it was all building toward our finance town hall in the fall of last year to really share with the organization, hey, here's what we've been working on. Here's our new vision.
That's part of keeping the whole organization updated about where we're going.
Yeah. But ahead of that, we basically took this strategy to create buy-in to our top senior leaders at the company. And I'll never forget, and again, keep in mind, like I don't think this is like a traditional way of standing up a strategy, which I think is great, by the way. We kind of like broke the mold there, but typically you've just got like kind of like a senior leader and like next level down, kind of going off site, developing something, coming back, sharing it. And we didn't do that. We engaged at the broader leadership level. And so when we went to this company leadership meeting to present our strategy and where we were really going, just to create buy-in and get support, one of our top senior leaders, I'll never forget this. He said, because you got to keep in mind, a lot of our finance leaders basically operate as like miniature CFOs across the business, and they do a lot of other stuff, but that's like put simply. And so this senior leader said, I think a great byproduct of you engaging your broader leadership team is now they've got this like renewed energy, and we feel that as business partners.
Wow.
We really feel that, and there's been a new energy brought to the work, and that was really important and really meaningful feedback for us to get. So I don't want to miss that point, and I think we can't emphasize it enough around like bringing people along.
Right.
But you asked about like kind of like next steps, really operationalizing the strategy and kind of what we're learning. I think a few things. Having leadership support and advocacy is so critical to any, transformation and strategy effort. I mean, Steve and his leadership team and our broader leaders could not be more supportive. And that includes also, by the way, like Steve's peers across the company, like really supportive of where we're going. And because it's intentional, what we're doing is intentionally tied back to enterprise, vision, purpose, strategy, and goals. And so that was like an intentional connect that we wanted to make. Like, this isn't happening in a vacuum. We're connecting to something bigger, which is to ultimately fulfill Unum's purpose to help the working world thrive throughout life's moments, right? Like that's a great vision everybody can rally behind. So making sure you've got leadership support and that they're operating as advocates and sponsors for whatever you're trying to do. I think though that the other piece for me is, how you, and we've talked about this a little bit, but how you should leave your assumptions at the door. Like just check those at the door, continually check those at the door.
It's hard.
Like every time, like we've built a process and we've said, yep, this is good. We've gotten feedback, buy-in. Here's, our next steps. We're using agile methodology now. And so operating in sprints, and every time I think, well, gosh, like, yeah, we've checked that box, like go back and recheck it and check it again and check it again.
Right.
And you shouldn't assume things about people. And I'll give an example. Last year, I just assumed that our finance leadership team, like, they're very aware of what's happening in the external environment, and they are about like in their field. But sometimes when you get broader than that, you're saying like, okay, well, let's talk about like the employee experience, right? You may have to have people kind of dig a little deeper, and again, I just assume you shouldn't assume at their levels that they've got this time to be experts in all things, right? And so that's a small example, but kind of check your assumptions at the door. The other thing, and this has been really critical, like really critical. It was great having you all come alongside of us, but we had to stand up our own internal team that was going to drive this forward and get the investment to make that happen. But even more than that, my key partner, and I said I wasn't going to mention direct names on this, with the exception of Steve, but I'm going to mention him. My direct partner in all of this, Mike Freeman, he's the head of finance enablement at Unum, and so he's really played, like, I've been kind of in that strategy and planning space, and he's been in the strategy transformation delivery space. And so like our roles being able to coordinate together, like he's my co-lead with Finance 2025, being able to work together to say like, okay, like, what's our communication strategy? How are we bringing people along? How are we thinking about the change? How are
Mm-hmm.
we mapping our stakeholders, and
Right.
really keeping that list active? And then for Mike to bring in with his team, like, and here's how we're actually here's the planning of this, like, here's how this is actually going to be operationalized and how we're going to roll this out. That's been really critical and served as a really strong foundation for how the work has continued to move forward. And so for me, those have been some definitely some big components that I would add in.
Great. And I think just reflecting back, what I'm hearing is really important for our audience today is that as you go through the visioning strategy process, and then you're really able to mobilize that transformation, is find the right partnership team, get the right team in place in your organization to make sure that momentum continues. Also, just want to shout out the fact that you talked about how a senior leader during the buy-in process talked about the excitement and the energy that they were feeling from the finance leadership team as they were engaged in the strategy process. Yeah. And that's a huge win. That's a huge win on how you all led the process, got them engaged, because often strategy feels like a burden. It's more work on top of the day-to-day. And I think because of the way that you engaged them and embraced this collaborative process that we brought to you, people felt like they were architecting their future. And as much time as we all put into work every day, to be a part of that next generation is inspirational. So I'm glad that paid off for you. I know that we have just a few minutes left and we have a number of people joining us live today. I just invite our guests who are joining us live on the podcast, if you have a question for Jeana, please pop it in the chat and we'll make sure that we get a chance to get to that as we wrap up today. Any other recommendations around leading major organizational change that you would advise before we get to any questions from the audience?
Yeah, two things. Communicate, and then communicate again.
Right.
Like, truly, I mean that.
Right.
But then the other thing is like this concept of holding the line. And here's what I mean. Like, you've got to establish a baseline on where you want people to be. Everybody's on a different, a different point in their change curve. You've got to understand your key stakeholder group, where people are on the change curve, where people are with their thought process, and you've got to establish kind of a line that you want people to constantly be at. And you've got to monitor that line. You've got to know when people are falling below the line, when they might be above the line. That's great. Right. But what's your strategy to get people back to the line? So that's my biggest takeaway, honestly, is like, establish the line.
Know where you are.
Bring people back up.
Right. So, I mean, actually, we have one of our guests today is ask a question that's really related to this. And it says, have you used any KPIs or metrics to gauge success or progress with the innovation or change and strategy work that you're doing?
Yeah. So when we created all of this, and this is the other thing you got to know how far you can push people. So Jenny knows where I'm going with this. So actually, one of your biggest recommendations to us was like, all right, we've kind of created this from almost backwards, right? You would start with like a vision, like what are your key metrics? What are the big objectives you're going to go after? And then like develop KPIs from there. Well, we didn't really start that way. We started with like research and building it kind of from the ground up. We developed a vision, and then it all was coming together in September of last year. We had a summit where you came and joined us, Jenny, and you said, like, we need to come up with some transformation goals. Like, you need goals. Like, we've got to have like these metrics. And our teams were working so hard on putting together all these research briefs, and we couldn't ask them to do anymore. It was just too much. So actually, we're right now in the midst of creating those, but you've got to be able to tell people what this looks like, when you're at the end, and how are you going to measure success? So we're in the midst of doing that right now, and it's critical.
Okay, great. Well, good. And I think there are other indicators that you have been monitoring. I think there were some engagement results that came in.
Yeah.
Where I think you had some progress there.
Oh gosh. Yeah, that's a great one. We, so Unum does a phenomenal job of we do like an annual engagement survey, but we also have a pulse survey that we do throughout the year. But in this year's pulse survey at the beginning of the year, there's a specific question geared towards our officers of the company. So AVPs and up, and it basically asks like, do you feel like you can have a voice in the change? And those who we had engaged in the change, like that specific question, it jumped up like double digits.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which was great. It was a great result.
That is a great result. So it sounds like more indicators to come, but the early results are your other key stakeholders in the business are seeing the energy coming from finance, their excitement from the leadership team. Pulse surveys and engagement results are showing real data in terms of increasing, and the future looks bright. So thank you. Anything else? One of the things that we always ask our guests to do for leaders in the arena is to share any words of wisdom or bit of advice that you have for other leaders that are driving major change or also in the arena. What piece of advice would you leave our participants with today?
Be prepared to get uncomfortable.
Be prepared to be uncomfortable.
Yes, to be
get
uncomfortable.
Right. Change your paradigm and change your results.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Change your paradigm, change your results. Well, thank you, Jeana, so much for sharing your story today. Congratulations to you and Steve and all the leaders at Unum for the great work that you do. Thanks for all the ways that you touch our community, and whether it's through your products and services or through your philanthropy efforts. It's a great organization. We're proud to be partnered with you in a number of ways.
Thanks, Jenny.
All right. Thanks, everyone. And we hope to see you again on another podcast series really soon.